Good evening. I call to order the December 2nd, 2020 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Let's see, Mr. Messer, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
Gladly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Present.
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mrs. Bowers?
Present.
Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Mr. Messer?
Present.
Mr. Morosky?
Here.
President Jones?
Here. Thank you. Members of the public who wish to speak during hearing the public must request to do so during the first 10 minutes after the start of the meeting. To speak, you will need to send a request by clicking the chat button. Submit your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, and your contact information if you want a direct response to any questions you might have. In keeping with the board's standard practice for hearing the public, you must click the camera icon when you are recognized to speak. Individuals who request to be heard after the first 10 minutes of the meeting will not be recognized to speak during this meeting. Thank you. Okay, so we don't have any board minutes for approval this afternoon. So we're going to go right to Ms. Bolton for our Finance, Budget, and Growth Committee meeting report.
Thank you, President Jones. I'll make this relatively quick, although we went over a number of topics. Our first topic, of course, was hearing a report from our government liaison folks, most particularly about some changes regarding transportation. And more importantly, and very important, as we've touched on the last couple of meetings, is the possibility of a new way of funding and creating a new equation. It's part of the Cup-Patterson. And so we heard a report as to how that is developing and where it is, and that there's some now controversy or opponents kind of making statements against it. So that is still up in the air, but we're pressing forward per our resolution last meeting. That would be very helpful for us, according to our treasurer. So that was part of it from the liaison folks. And then also we have found in the treasurer's monthly update and presentation too that there is nothing out of the ordinary, but it does appear that what the treasurer kind of told us in our budget development is that it does appear that the revenue seems to be increasing somewhat as reported during the finance meeting. And so that's somewhat reassuring based upon some of our adjustments that we made in our own budget efforts. We also had a relatively detailed, but not yet detailed enough, because we're going to be spending some time in December on this too, about what we really are paying and how we really are involved with our transportation costs and services and safety. And the public will be reminded that we're responsible not only for our own students, but also for charter students and private students as well, and the parochial students. So we want more and more disaggregation and separation about how each of those recipients of our services are costing us, as well as how much money we are spending in order to keep those buses kind of in reserve and staff members in reserve, so that we are again committed to in-person when we can have in-person. Most important item out of the transportation thing is, besides the fluctuation, two most important issues are the Metro cards for our high school students, so that there's equitably distributed across all of our high schools and what have you. But the other thing that was critical, and this will come up in finance in December too, is that virtually all of our and all board members are interested in this and need to help us and participate in this. All of our transportation contracts, according to Mr. Johnson, are up at the end of this year. And as we look at a new CPS, this is an opportunity for us to rethink and perhaps together redesign how we're going to be approaching transportation or alignment to our schools. The other piece was that it was brought up that it's possible if we have transportation resources in reserve, we might be needing them to help transport our students, perhaps to keep current with our medical testing and medical services in some way, shape, or form. So at least be thinking about that as the new calendar year rolls around. And then we had a brief discussion and sharing of information regarding the development of the 5-year forecast, which we have now obviously adopted, but also how we're going to start planning for fiscal year 22's budget and hoping that we're not in a situation where we're still working on it for good reason 6 months in, hoping that we can come through the COVID piece and hoping that we can get back to our strategic plan and what it may cost us and how we can reach those goals. And then finally, we did decide, and this has already been done by the board as a result of this, we did have 4 members of our audit committee returning for service, and we really appreciate those community members that are willing to serve. I submit for approval.
Okay, do board members have questions or comments about the report? Okay, I need a motion to approve the minutes as written.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Ms. Bolton. Okay, at board matters, Mr. Morosky, you please give us an update on the anti-racism policy.
Sure, be happy to. We will be looking at.
Hold on. Sorry, my mistake.
I thought so, but I do what I'm told.
My
Most of
mistake.
the time.
My mistake.
Oh, wait, we're going to take a
the
picture.
game.
Screenshot. Morosky does what he's told.
For showing that you on your Facebook, like, what? Sorry about that. But thanks for being prepared. You were prepared. Okay. All right. So, Superintendent Mitchell, this is our presentations for tonight.
Yes. Thank you. So board member Bolton's comments about the strategic plan, it's a nice segue to our presentations tonight. You know, all of last school year, when we launched the new strategic plan, every single board meeting, we had a presentation that provided an update on some aspect of the strategic plan. And this year, with COVID-19, we haven't couched the work that we've been doing in our presentations under those categories. And we will do that moving forward because you will be able to see how this is an alignment to the 5 goal areas. So tonight's presentation falls under goal area optimized capabilities. If you have a chance to look at our strategies as well as our measures, the presentation we're going to talk about as it relates to employee engagement provided by our Assistant Superintendent Susan Bunty is in alignment with optimized capabilities and engaging our employees in authentic ways. And so I'm going to turn this presentation over to Assistant Superintendent Susan Bunty. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Mitchell. And I think that Rob has our deck, and here it comes. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here this afternoon with our Director of Talent Development, Sarah Brody, and we're going to share with you what we have been thinking about and doing in terms of measuring our overall employee engagement. So on the next slide, you can see that we are all incredibly passionate about this work. We believe that in supporting our CPS employees to be their best, that we can positively impact student outcomes. We're going to share 2 key messages with you this afternoon. On the next slide, you can see, first of all, that we are very committed to increasing employee engagement, again, to support student achievement. But we also truly believe that in order to make sure that our overall engagement strategies are effective, that we have to have the opportunity to be able to measure those. As on the next slide, as our superintendent mentioned, and as you probably remember, our work is closely aligned to the strategic plan under optimized capabilities, and we're holding ourselves accountable even in the midst of a pandemic for really making sure that we connect and engage our employees. This work is also anchored in many of our other initiatives across the organization. So on the next slide, you can see that we have provided training and professional development to all of our leaders through the Leadership Pipeline Institute. And we focused on functional leaders, leader of leaders, leader of others, and individual contributors. We know that although some leadership comes naturally, there are also skills and tools and strategies that we can utilize to be more effective in our work. You also recognize in the middle our central office competencies. These are what drive our work and what we use for our central office evaluation. And finally, you see Gallup, which is the measure that we use to benchmark our progress in the engagement arena. Sarah Brody now is going to spend some time talking with you about how we dig in and measure that engagement. Sarah?
Thank you, Susan. Good evening. On the next slide, I'm going to share with you a little bit about why we have prioritized employee engagement. And as you can see here, we know that employee engagement is connected to the outcomes that matter for our employees to be successful and for our students to be successful. And the research tells us that engaged employees are more committed to their work, they're more innovative and productive, they work more efficiently, they're safer, and they're more likely to be retained in their roles. On the next slide, I will share with you a little bit about the employee engagement measure that we use, which, as Susan shared, is the Gallup Q12 Employee Engagement Survey. And this survey measures the extent to which employees' universal needs, so whether you're a CPS employee or an employee elsewhere, are being consistently met. And when you look at this slide, you might it might remind you of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of a pyramid. And so at the base of that pyramid, for example, employees really need to feel focused and they need to be free from unnecessary stress. And so those bottom two questions kind of tie to the basic needs that employees have, and they're measured by questions such as, I know what's expected of me at work, and I have the materials and equipment to do my work right. And then kind of going up the pyramid at the very top, our employees really want to feel like they're challenged and can grow, and so there are questions that tie to that. And in the middle, there are questions connected to feeling like a part of a team and being recognized and honored as an individual. So that's what our survey measures. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we use to approach our employee engagement measurements and work. So the first step is really, of course, measuring engagement using our survey. And we administer the survey in the fall to get our baseline for the year, and then again in the spring to measure our growth. After each survey, it's really important that we share the results out and then have deep conversations at the team level about the state of our team, and then take concrete actions to improve, and then monitor our progress and implementation along the way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of goes into each of these elements of our process. First, on the next slide, our survey administration. We're really trying to find out each time we deliver the survey, what are our employee needs in this moment? And every time we do our survey, we're measuring a snapshot in time. So you might think about what was happening at the beginning of September when we did our survey in this fall, and it was really the beginning of a new school year during COVID. But it's really important for us to take a pulse on engagement, even in difficult times, because otherwise we're really flying blind. And so when we administered the survey in the fall, we surveyed about 1,900 employees across 20 pilot schools, central office, and Iowa Street. And we included employees across all employee groups. On the next slide, I will talk a little bit about how we share our results and how the sharing of our results is so important because it helps us support a data-driven culture, and it helps provide that feedback loop and transparency around the data. And so we're very intentional about making sure that everyone who takes the survey really understands how we did in the aggregate as an organization. And then again, at the team level, that folks have the opportunity to look at their data and their teams and talk about it. And so we share it out across the board, and then more specifically at the team level. And then on the next slide, I'll talk about really where the magic happens with this work. And that's at the team level. Once folks have their data, we're really trying to support constructive conversations happening about where we are. And we help folks talk about what are our strengths when we look at our data and what is happening in our team to make those our strengths. And similarly, once we kind of talk about the strengths, we also want to really push folks to think about what are our growth areas and what makes those our growth areas. We ask folks to think about the results and whether they surprise them and whether or not, they might answer a question the same now as they might have when the survey was administered a few weeks prior. And those are really powerful conversations that teams are having across our district. And once we complete those conversations as a part of this third step, on the next slide, what all teams are doing is really thinking about what concrete action steps can we take to improve. And this is really something that I love about this work. We really are trying to marry this engagement work with the critical performance goals that teams have already set for the year. So it's not meant to be detached, it's meant to be really integrated. And so we're helping teams think about this data in the context of their critical work that they're doing to improve student learning. So we'll prompt teams to think about what is a performance goal that we have for the year, which Gallup element would support that work the most, and then what concrete SMART goal might you set as a team that we can collectively work on to improve. And so that's happening right now across our schools and central office. And then after state of the team meetings happen and action planning happens, on the next slide, we are really focused on following and tracking our improvement work, because really that's what this is at its core. And so the images you see here at the school level, folks are integrating their Gallup work into their one plans and this whole sort of QI, quality improvement model. And they're planning and doing and studying and acting around what kind of goals they've set and tracking and monitoring their progress. And with our central office and Iowa Street departments who don't use one plans, they're doing that in the Gallup Access platform. And that's something that we're looking at all throughout the process and throughout the year to kind of check and see how we're doing. And then finally, after we kind of go through this cycle and we pulse and we check again in the spring and we'll see our improvement. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the learnings that we had from our fall survey. And these are really interesting. So I just wanted to pull out a couple of strengths and a couple of growth areas and then a point on equity. So when we surveyed in the fall, what we noticed bubbling up as a strength are that folks generally are feeling cared for at work. They are responding positively to the need that they have opportunities to learn and grow in their roles. And importantly, are taking pride in the quality of work that we're doing together. In our areas of growth, we saw that we have some room to improve around understanding what is expected of us and recognizing the value of work and the person doing that work. We're also looking at the data across different elements. So from an equity lens, we really wanted to check to see if there were disparities in how our employees are experiencing work. And when we looked at our data in the aggregate this time around, we did not see disparities in engagement scores when we looked at it by gender or by race, but it's going to be really important for us to continue to keep a pulse on that, and we'll continue to look at it. If you can go to the next slide, please. So what we'll be doing now is taking a look at the action plans that schools and departments have submitted and synthesizing those so that we can focus and tailor our support as a department to help schools and central office departments continue to improve. We plan to continue to pulse employee needs because, as I mentioned earlier, every time we survey, it's a snapshot in time, and so we need to continue to keep our pulse on how employee needs are evolving and shifting as the work evolves and shifts, particularly during this time of COVID. And we'll prepare for our spring survey administration and prepare ourselves to onboard new schools for next year. We plan to expand our survey sample to include all schools in the coming school year, and so we'll need to do some real legwork there to make sure that folks understand the purpose of this work and are prepared to implement it in their buildings. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Do board members have questions or comments? Ms. Bowers, please unmute.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. That was an excellent presentation. I just have one question. Do you do any type of entering new staff gallops about expectation about what they're coming into? Also, like for onboarding?
That's a really interesting question. We haven't incorporated the Gallup specifically into our onboarding content, but what we do with onboarding is really try to steep folks in our core values connected to caring, collaboration, and so on. And so, but I think that's a really interesting question, Ms. Bowers, and I'd like to kind of write it down and think about it a little bit with the team.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Other questions or comments? Mr. Lindsay? Okay, I got you. Go ahead, Mr. Lindsay.
Thanks, President Jones. Sarah and Susan, I think this is great and really exciting, and I'm so happy that as a district we're continuing to focus on the staff experience. I think it's particularly great that we're looking for differences by race and by gender, and particularly great that you didn't find any. I think that's really something worth celebrating. I just wanted to check on the timeline. So we do fall and spring, right? So there's no like mid-year data that we're looking at now. It was that you may have said this, and if you did, I apologize. Was the fall data like about what you were hoping to see? Was it less than what you wanted to see? Was it more than you wanted to see?
I can speak to that. So the fall data really was about on par with what other North American organizations early in their engagement journey might find. So I think it was pretty on par with what we were expecting. In particular, during this time of COVID, we've seen nationally, and I can't speak to globally, but nationally, that engagement has dropped a bit, and that's been a real challenge. But I think the starting point that we identified in the fall was pretty much on par with other organizations in the United States.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Mr. Messer?
Yes, I would also add my gratitude and appreciation for the district focusing in this area. This is what good employers do. Employers who don't care about their people are not always that successful, and most often they have people who are not happy and leave, or they're just disgruntled. And as one of the largest employers in the region, I think it's fascinating. I'd be curious to see how many districts nationally will look to this as a model to adopt later, because I think the public sector is not as commonly using this yet, but I will say every Fortune 50, every Fortune 100 company worth their merit is focused on employee engagement, just like you're doing. And yes, numbers are going to be down because some of the key things that make people engage are I have the tools and resources to do my job. I know what's expected of me. This pandemic has shown, we don't even know. We don't know what people need, and I think that's part of selling this to our employees, is saying, we need to bring you into the process, which gets them engaged to the work. And then, of course, the most powerful thing is doing that impact planning, where they get the power to say, I'm going to change my work group by doing this and this. So congratulations to this. I do think this will be something that we will see Cincinnati Public Schools share on the national stage at conferences, et cetera, because it is a totally different way to look at how we engage our employees. And I commend you for all your work.
Thank you. Any other questions and comments? Okay. Looks good. Thank you, Sarah Brody. Thank you, Susan Bunty, for the great presentation. All righty. The next presentation, Superintendent.
Yes, the next presentation comes under health and safety of our strategic plan, and we're going to have Sarah Trimble Oliver, our Chief Strategy Officer, present the health data as it relates to the City of Cincinnati as well as Hamilton County. Following Sarah Trimble Oliver, Donna Murphy, one of our assistant superintendents, will give the board some highlights as it relates to the data related to our sports teams who have been operating during winter sports. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. As Ms. Mitchell mentioned, health and safety was identified as one of our 5 main goals about a year and a half ago. Well, in March 2020, when COVID hit, our strategies had to change drastically in order for us to keep meeting that goal. So tonight we're going to review the community COVID health data as well as the CPS COVID health data, the same data that we have been reviewing on an ongoing basis. So first we will look at the COVID cases within Hamilton County school districts. This is for the week prior to November 26th. There were 150 new student cases and 159 new staff cases in Hamilton County Public Schools, which you can see on the graph on the right. That was actually fewer students than the prior week, but more staff than the prior week. And again, that is 150 new student cases out of a total number of 114,000 students enrolled in public schools. On the next slide is our city daily new case count. And what is interesting about this update of the data is that we are seeing a flattening of the 7-day average over the past week or two. So our 7-day average now, which is the gray, the small gray dots, is at 181 daily new cases, which is down from a week ago when I reported this, which was 191. And so again, this particular city daily new cases has been flat over the past couple of weeks. On the next slide, we have the last 14 days, again, relatively flat from the beginning of this 14-day period to now. We actually have 7 days which are in green, which is a decrease in the 7-day average from the prior day, which there were 4 green dots last week when we reviewed this data. So the 7-day average of 181, when you divide that by the population, that equates to 59 new cases per 100,000, down slightly from last week, which was at 62. The county is at is higher than the city right now. It's at 68 new cases per 100,000. The county is also seeing the same trend as the city, which is actually slightly down from 14 days ago to now. So a very small bit of positive news is that we are not continuing to increase at this latest review of the daily new cases, but the bad news is that it's flattening out still at that very high rate of daily new cases, which of course we have seen that is a rate that makes it difficult for us to have enough staff in our school buildings to maintain our safety protocols due to staff being out with illness, isolation, and quarantines. One additional note of caution about this possible flattening is that this time period does include the Thanksgiving holiday, and it could have impacted that number of cases due to people not going to get tested or possibly even being out of town and unable to get tested. And so that is just one consideration. On the next slide, the news about the positivity rate is not good. It is now at 10.3 for the city of Cincinnati and 15.5 for Hamilton County outside of the city, which is an increase from last week. The average length to get test results does remain around 2 days. And on the last slide is our CPS COVID data. One more slide. For our students, we have had 1,451 students isolated for symptoms, 921 tested for COVID, and of those, 131 have been confirmed positive cases since October 13th. And again, that is out of 35,000 students. Confirmed staff cases since October 13th is now up to 214. And now I will turn it over to Ms. Shauna Murphy to present some athletic COVID data.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you. Focusing in on our student athletes in particular, I wanted to share with you a little bit of data from October the 23rd through yesterday, December 1st, as we started winter sports. We've had a total of 17 positive student cases, 2 of them from Clark Montessori, 6 from Walnut Hills High School, 6 from Western Hills High School, 1 Hughes, 1 Taft, and 1 Riverview East. Among our coaches and our staff members, we've had 10 positive cases, 1 from Aiken, Clark 1, Gamble 1, Hughes 1, Schroeder 1, Walnut Hills 3, Woodward High School 2. We have had 19 teams on pause since we started our winter sports program. 2 of those programs have been put on pause due to interscholastic competition. One was a Taft versus Walnut Hills situation, and the other was a Wyoming versus Taft game. We believe there is the potential that there is spread among 1 team in our school district, and that was a varsity boys basketball team between the junior high, the JV and the high school varsity basketball program at Western Hills. One program in our district has been placed on pause 2 times, and that is Clark High School's varsity boys basketball team for a total of a 14-day pause. Of course, we put our teams on pause immediately after a positive case is reported. We do close contact notification and proper communication to our families with the guidance of the CDC and Cincinnati Public Schools. I wanted to share with you the number of student athletes per team as it compares to the total number of students in schools. And we do have this data for all of our high schools, but I'll just take a moment to share maybe 3. Aiken High School, just because they're first on our list. In the high school, there are 92 winter sports student athletes out of 667 students in the building. At Hughes, there are 109 student athletes in high school for winter sports as compared to 647 total high school students. And let's say Withrow has a total of 98 student athletes for the winter out of 966 students. The breakdown of positive cases versus teams on pause for the fall, there were 1,504 total high school student athletes as it compares to the winter, a total of 1,685 student athletes. Again, for the fall, a total of 10 positive cases with students and athletes, and then for the winter, there's been a total of 27 to date. Program pauses for the fall, there were 5, and then for the winter, 19. And that's just a little bit of data on our student athletes in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna Murphy and Sarah Trimble Oliver, I'm sorry. So we wanted to provide this data for you. We are collecting data, continuing to collect data during distance learning about the positivity of our students as well as our staff members. I would like to just bring back to the public's attention and recollection that the reason we decided to go to distance learning was not because there were a huge number of cases within our schools. We've actually had very little. We can only account for 1 spread within a school, and it was a very small number. The reason that we went to distance learning was due to the number of staff members who were out sick with COVID and in isolation, or staff members who are in quarantine because they have been a close contact, or in quarantine taking care of a sick family member. And so again, our protocols that we've put in place with the help of Children's Hospital and the Cincinnati Health Department, those strategies have really worked to not spread within our schools. Our schools are very safe. We went to distance learning because of the number of staff members who were not able to come to work due to illness or being in quarantine. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy and Superintendent. Board members, questions or comments? Ms. Bowers, please unmute.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent. I wanted to inquire and just ask your feedback and comfort level about how things are going with our athletes as far as safety protocols and the feel for how we're progressing with the COVID-19.
I believe I would be accurate, and my colleague Susan Bunty might be able to help me out. My understanding on the daily huddles with Children's Hospital and other healthcare members, they've been very complimentary to the work being done by our athletic director, Josh Harden, all of our coaches and our school staff in terms of quickly identifying and wrapping our arms around potential cases, and then even those who have been confirmed cases. I believe that our processes and procedures are going really well.
So
Thank you.
actually this morning on the huddle call with Cincinnati Health Department and Cincinnati Children's, athletics was highlighted as having very positive systems in place and being able to just have very smooth processes in terms of reporting.
Good. Thank you both.
Other questions or comments? Okay. I think that my recollection was that we would give an update. We would give a public update this evening about athletics, and that we would also provide some direction or guidance as to how we proceed. And so given what Ms. Bunty and Ms. Murphy said, are board members okay with proceeding or continuing with the winter sports as is? Or are there any ideas, comments about that? Ms. Bolton.
Based upon that data and based upon knowing how important these programs are to our students, I would be willing to continue to do what we're doing, using the pause, using the protocols, but most particularly would want to know the rules regarding audience attendance and those other safety procedures. I would hope that recruiters could at least watch, but I would be very much interested in limiting, and I think we are, having attended one, a very limited audience, and I was carded and not allowed in, so that was great. I was pleased about that. I miss seeing my neighbor's kid, but the reality is I'd like to know for sure that the audience is protected and that we don't have that kind of community spread. But as a person that spent 36 years with teenagers, I want them to be able to do this if we can provide the protocols that are necessary. And them participating becomes a decision for their parents. And I think that's where it belongs.
Yep. Ms. Murphy, any comment to that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We are streaming all of our games and competition. And we are not allowing spectators other than the coaches, the media, and any college recruiters at this time.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. So I guess I'm not hearing any objections to proceeding as is. with that, if we're okay with that? Okay, sounds good. Okay, any other questions or comments? I believe there probably is one more sort of outstanding question perhaps, and that is any updates, questions, or concerns about how we move forward just in terms of school reopening, the building sort of reopening. I believe last time we spoke, we said anticipating January 5th, and we heard the superintendent say that we would need to know ahead of the game kind of where we stand in order to give people opportunity to plan. So do board members have questions or comments regarding that particular guidance? Ms. Bolton, followed by Mr. Borowski.
My position is, as everyone's has, to get to in person whenever we possibly can. But knowing the Thanksgiving and the other winter holiday, Christmas coming up, and knowing there's always a delay of a week or two to get the surge, I don't think it's reasonable for us to be able to open in person as early as January 4th or 5th or whatever that date was, and would want to delay it either till the end of January or at least the week after, but still commit to trying to open and be in person and remote. And I know people are working on how we can do that, but I think we need to tell the families that I'm not hopeful about being able to be January 4th or 5th or whatever, but I don't want to lose the whole year at all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Morosky?
Thank you, President Jones. I have serious reservations about the 4th, like Ms. Bolton. I still maintain spring break is a good mark, but am willing to obviously entertain other options. I also, though, want to put out there that I want to clarify, I guess, something. When we talk about January 4th, or now Ms. Bolton is saying, beyond that, MLK or February or spring break, whenever, the date we're talking about is, are we talking about an aspirational date to go back or a date that will reevaluate? Because if we're saying, say, February 1st, then the date to reevaluate would be 2 weeks earlier. Do you see what I'm saying? So are we talking about like a date that we're shooting to open or a date that we want to reevaluate the data?
Can I respond to that? And board members can tell me if I'm going around that. I believe that we talked about having a conversation about how we plan out what we're going to do. So these dates are sort of tentative around that. So might we be able to use the January 16th date? For example, if there is a decision to push it back at least till the end of the month on January 16th, does that give us ample time to kind of plan it out a little more comprehensively and completely for the rest of the year? Is that what you're asking, Mr. Morosky?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So
Carolyn,
I don't think January 4th. I think January 4th is out.
Right. We hear that. Okay, Ms. Bowers and then Ms. Bates.
Yes, thank you, President Jones. I agree with what you just said, and in agreement with understanding what Board Member Morowski is saying. So identifying the 16th as maybe the date to look at data to determine if the 1st of February would be a return date. I think that makes sense.
Okay. Ms. Bates and then Mr. Lindy.
Yes, and from what I understand, we are collecting data from our staff about positive tests and also their quarantines. So if our data for our staff is better than the community data, I mean, in the first place, the reason is, as Superintendent Mitchell stated earlier, that we closed is because we can't staff the schools, not because our schools aren't safe. So even if the data is not where we want it to be in the community, if our staff is staying healthy and they're following proper protocols in the community and are reporting their positives and quarantines, and that's lower than what the city and county is reporting, I think that should factor in a very big way in the decision to open, not just relying on the community data.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lindy.
Thank you, President Jones. I wanted to just share my support for the dates that Board Member Morosky and Board Member Bowers shared, that we look on the 16th to decide what to do after the 1st. I think it's a great timeline. I wanted to bring up a topic that I raised last time because I want to keep bringing this up, that as the administration considers just what options we have when we look at the data around the 16th, to look at if it doesn't look like we could bring everybody back, could we prioritize bringing back younger kids, and could we prioritize bringing back students with special needs? I hope we can bring back everybody, but if we do have to make hard choices, I really would like us to look really hard to see if we can be strategic in terms of bringing kids back where there's both the biggest opportunity for academic impact and where there's the least risk, I think, of COVID transmission. And then I was just reading something online this week from the former Secretary of Education, I think Arnie Duncan, that just had a nice image of like maybe schools could be the places where we're ultimately giving out vaccines. And then maybe that could happen in this school year. And that's not an action step for anybody. It's just a picture of something that has me feeling hopeful for the first time in a while. You know, as we head into the holiday season, I hope that 2021 is a year where that's what could be going on in CPS and get ourselves back to a better situation. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Bolton?
Just to follow up on what Mr. Lindy said, I think we talked last time about the fact that we have the infrastructure to a certain extent because of our 20-some school-based health centers and what have you. But I really would encourage us and the public that is listening to make sure that the governor understands that teachers are essential workers and should not be so far down the line to receive vaccinations. We know that kids will be among the last to receive it. We know that, but it seems, as I know other districts, the problem is staffing, and that's why the schools are not open. So if there's a way to convince the governor to at least up the teachers as priority, then we know that they do want the schools reopened.
I would reiterate that, and I think we need to be active advocates for that, meaning perhaps write a letter to the governor's office or a phone call or something to the governor's office as a district. So maybe that'll be an assignment. Okay. So let me see if I can clarify for purposes of moving forward. We all agree that January 16th at our work session, we would have a discussion around sort of the long-term plan. What is our vision, and maybe put some things in place. But if what I'm hearing folks say is accurate, we're not anticipating coming back till perhaps at least at the earliest the end of January. Is that correct? Is that correct?
Carolyn?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Messer? Mr. Messer?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this isn't our last meeting, right? We have,
right.
And so I think it'd be worthwhile to ask the superintendent to come back with a recommendation on how we appropriately manage our return, because, you know, I think sometimes we as a community, all of us, forget just how big, we're not a district of a few hundred kids. So 38,000 kids-ish minus some, whatever there, and all these schools and the complexity of keeping workplace safe and everything else, staffing, I think might be good to have a recommendation come to us at our next meeting on that. But I think what I'm hearing is
Monday. I don't know if that gives them enough time. So how about the 16th? just what I'm trying to clarify, Mr. Messer, what you're asking. You're asking the superintendent to offer her recommendations, which I agree with.
Yeah, I think maybe the takeaway for
date.
me, I think the takeaway for me is it's probably not, it's good for our public to know, probably not going to be a good thing to come back right after the Christmas holiday / Hanukkah holiday and everything else, that January 4th. But just thinking about trying to move this ship after people have come back from holiday break, et cetera. So that's probably not going to work. So I think it's good to signal that likely won't be before the dates that you're talking about, but let us kind of look at a formal recommendation.
Okay.
That's your point.
So maybe let me change my question. Are you looking for a formal recommendation prior to the January 16th meeting where we work through some of this? Can the superintendent come with her recommendations at that meeting? Or are you asking for something earlier?
I think something earlier to say, here's how we're going to bridge the gap between now and then. And just a recommendation to say, based on this, we think the earliest we would come back is this date, whatever she comes back with. And then here's the process we'll use to make the decision on when and then how we come back. And then that will be on the 16th.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I think Ms. Bowers, did you have your hand up before I go to Ms. Bolton? Okay, sorry.
No, Ryan did fine. No, that was okay.
Okay, Ms. Bolton.
I just got confused, which happens often, but my understanding was that we would tell the families and our folks that we are not going to be coming back on the 1st of January, and that I think it's too early to ask the superintendent for a recommendation next Wednesday or next Monday, but the December 16th board meeting, perhaps she could come back with the appropriate recommendation that I think Ryan's right to ask, because she'll know how to do that. And then, with that recommendation, then we can also continue to talk about it on the January 6th or at the retreat or the work session. But I would like to close tonight with the people knowing we're not coming back January 4th or 5th, and that the superintendent's going to come back with a recommendation maybe on December 16th, and we can further map out what we need to based on her recommendation when we meet in the retreat.
I think you heard it right. I heard you repeat what Mr. Messer had said. Ryan, Mr. Messer, I saw your hand, and then superintendent has comments.
Yeah, and I think, all I'm trying to get at is, we have a superintendent and a team that think about this all day, every day. And I would like it to say, hey, here's where you are. Superintendent says, hey, I don't, because Laura's already thought through this. So we sit and banter and batter and do all this discussion over here. They've already spent talking. And I think if we just said, hey, what do you think is ideal? We would probably get that. And I'm pretty sure we'd be 90% there, and then say, great. And so probably not going to be right there after the first of the year. And then on the 16th, we can talk about what that reentry plan will look like, the measures and metrics, et cetera, and the process for doing that. So I'm just stating, I think it's good to signal that we will not be returning to classes based on this conversation on the 4th, but then what that process beyond that looks at, I think the superintendent can bring us a recommendation on that.
Thank you. Superintendent?
Yes, so I'm happy to bring some information back to you on the 16th of December. I would just like to have this caveat to say that it's a whole month before you all make the decision, and a lot of data can change within that 30-day period. And so just know that we will really work on a re-entry plan and the phase-in and how all that can happen, and be ready on the 16th, but know that it could change based upon the data 30 days later.
Yes.
And just one last comment to that. I think what you're really good about is process and your metrics. And I think getting that out to our public to say, here's what that will look like when the data hits these points, I think that will be very helpful.
Okay. Thank you. Last comment, Ms. Bolton?
One last thing. Of course, as a superintendent can advise us and tell us what needs to happen, totally 100% with that. I do think that the community does need to know, though, that the superintendent has created a committee of knowledgeable people and expert people across the district that are, looking into how we are going to provide remote and in person for the rest of the year. So Ryan's right. She's got it already happening and figuring it out. But I think the community needs to be reassured that that kind of conversation is happening. That's very exciting and very kind of the new CPS. And I'm excited that she's done that.
Thank you. Okay. So I think we're in a good place with that. We're all in agreement for how to move forward. Sounds like a good plan. Okay. Anything else then regarding the safety planning update? Superintendent, any questions of us? Okay. All right, so we'll move on. We are now at the item on our agenda for hearing the public. The board prides itself on being as transparent and open as possible. Consistent with the state's direction to minimize public gatherings, we are convening this video conference call to include opportunity for public comment. Here, again, are the specific instructions for participation and hearing of the public. Members of the public who wish to speak during the board meeting must make requests through the chat feature, including your full name, affiliation to the district, school community, and contact information for response to questions. This request models standard practice if we were meeting in person in the Ed Center. Mr. Hoying will be our timekeeper. Once the request has been granted, you will be invited to enter. Please click on the camera icon to go interactive. After speaking, you will briefly see the welcome screen again as you transition back to the live stream meeting. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak and may only speak once. When the timer goes off, we'll let you know that your 2 minutes are up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel items, and we ask that your public commentary be respectful of all those listening. Thank you. All righty. How many speakers, and are we ready to go?
Yes, ma'am. We have about 5 or 6 speakers this evening, as well as CFT President Julie Sellers. Our first speaker is Yusuf Munir, followed by Alice Flanders. Go ahead, Mr. Munir.
Can you all see and hear me? Hello?
Go ahead, yes.
I'm Leah. I think he said followed by Julie Sellers.
No. Oh,
May I begin?
Go ahead, Mr. Munir.
My name is Yusuf Munir. I am a CPS student, and I am the president of Young Activist Coalition. I'm here today because Cincinnati Public Schools is actively criminalizing students. To deny that would be to ignore the indisputable data and lived experiences of your students. We are here today to demand the complete removal of police and punitive policies from CPS schools, an increase in psychologists, social workers, and counselors on school campuses, and the implementation of well-funded, well-researched, restorative, and transformative justice practices. I want to explain why YAC is dissatisfied with the current anti-racism. At best, policy is nothing more than words on papers that will be glossed over and change nothing, because it does not focus on accountability for CPS employees. It does not have an implementation plan for restorative and transformative justice, and it most certainly does not discuss the issue of police criminalizing children. Instead, it focuses on interpersonal racism rather than the systemic racism. I will not be covering the data in my statement today because I think others will do a good job of that, and I've discussed it before. Instead, I want to talk about my own lived experience. On September 20th, 2019, I was threatened with arrest by an SRO. I was 16 years old at the time. And do you want to know what my dastardly crime was? I tried to practice my First Amendment right to go to a protest at City Hall. I was threatened to be taken to jail because I was skipping school while I was on school campus. And you know what? I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the ones that didn't end up being sent to court. And there are plenty of CPS students who aren't so lucky. And the blame for that and the continuation of the school to prison pipeline is on you, Superintendent Mitchell, and all of the board members who refuse to listen to the indisputable data and to your students, the children that you are responsible for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Alice Flanders, followed by Seth. Go ahead, Ms. Flanders.
Hi there. My name is Alice Flanders, and I'm a proud alum of CPS schools. I'm here today to reiterate points that have been made before me and request that CPS break ties with Cincinnati Police. The SROs in our schools, no matter how pleasant the personal relationships may be, are there to criminalize children. Our children deserve transformative and restorative justice, not penalization. Please break ties with CPD. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please unmute, Mr. Hoyne. We can't hear you.
Hello? Hi.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Seth Weber, and I live in Clifton Heights, and I just want to express my support for the Young Activist Coalition's demands for CPS to cut ties with Cincinnati Police Department and remove officers from school, and because I think students in our district deserve a more creative and constructive method of dealing with the problems that come up in our schools. I don't think kids belong in jails or prisons. I don't think kids need to be criminalized, and I don't think that they exist to be exploited by the prison industrial complex. The police, the jails, prisons exist to punish people, and I don't think kids need punishment so much as they need patient guidance. And in my experience, police officers are not very patient people, and our kids need patient people in our schools. And our prison industrial complex, it doesn't exist to rehabilitate. Quite the contrary. Jails and prisons are a great way to harden our children into criminals, basically. We're criminalizing our children. I question the wisdom of a school board which allows a demonstrably racist institution to exist in our schools. The numbers bear this out. Black CPS students are disproportionately targeted and affected by police presence in our school. And finally, I'd just like to recall an incident 2 years ago in which an officer tased an 11-year-old girl at a Kroger. He put her in handcuffs and said to her, "This is why there are no grocery stores in the Black community." And the Fraternal Order of Police president, that he supported this use of force. It shows that police would sooner brutalize a young girl than allow $5 worth of merchandise to leave the store.
I'm sorry. Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is O.Z. Davis, followed by CFT President Julie Sellers. Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Can you hear me, Carolyn?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
We can.
I'm sorry, Dan. How's everybody doing today? I want to thank you all for your service. I am very much appreciative of each and every one of you. I've got a couple points I want to make. One is I think you guys should extend the time of executive session or change the times of the meetings about a half hour. Since we've gone virtual, there has been less of a in regard to the audience that's waiting. So we're consistently late starting board meetings, and it's starting to get burdensome on my end because I'm looking at the phone for 26 minutes tonight. So I think we should and since I don't know what's going on in executive session, but I've been in one before, I think you may need to look at lengthening the time of the executive session so that the board meeting will start on time to honor the public. I'd really appreciate that. My second point was I wanted to commend you all on allowing winter sports to continue. But I wanted to request that the board have enough faith and confidence in administration to let administration really assess if parents should be allowed to the game. So as the sports Cincinnati Heat, I've been to 3 different leagues already. I went to Mount Healthy, I went to Moeller, and I've been to Aiken. And I've had a chance to assess others' protocols. And CPS's protocols by far are greater and more reliable than any of the others. I think Josh and Shauna will do a very good job, and their staffs, around setting
Mr. Davis.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Your time is up.
Thank
yes.
You. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Julie, before you start, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have one other speaker, Mr. Taylor, who, if he accepts the invitation, can speak following you.
You're
Julie,
muted.
sorry.
Okay. Number one, I would like to just say that I am so excited that we were able to receive a national AFT grant that is going to provide a safety hotline of support for parents. We had a press conference yesterday. There were a few of the school board members who participated. There was a great article on Channel 12 explaining how this is going to work. And actually, I just want to report and let everyone know we did receive some calls today through the Google Doc, and they were really, there were easy questions for us to answer. We were able to help them already, and I think it's going to be a very positive initiative for the parents of CPS students. So I will be giving you an update on this, but I feel very positive about the outcomes of this initiative. Secondly, I would like to talk about and ask some comments and questions about the employee engagement presentation. When they were looking at the team level, I would like to know what constitutes a team. If you're talking about teacher teams, I find it a little bit ironic that you understand the importance of team input and tracking progress, yet so many decisions have been made at central office with very strong top-down dictates. Teachers know what they need in order to be successful, but many of the teachers in this district are feeling like they're being left out of many discussions and that they are not able to verbalize or report what it is that they need to be successful. And that was one of the things where Pam brought on about the onboarding content with the new hires. I know for sure that this year we've been getting hundreds of calls from teachers who are newly hired on support and feeling like they didn't have exactly what they needed. But yet, through our budget process, we cut every single one of our district-wide mentors, which provided supports for new hires. And we at CFT strongly believe that those cuts to the district-wide mentors was a disservice to our new teachers this year. And I hope that with all of this discussion about employee experiences, that we have that support for those new hires, that we are able to go in and give them a strong induction program. Because if we want to keep teachers within our district, we have to be able to provide the supports for them to be successful. My third point is in the treasurer's report, amendments to the agreements. There was an agreement that was doubled in the amount of money from $72,000 was added to double the total. And as we are working strongly to streamline our budget for this school year, I was disturbed to see that the district made under this agreement that we have because we have opened an entire new department with large financial investments in the talent development department. My question and concern is that with doubling an outside contract for professional development, why are we increasing contracts and doubling contracts while we have an entire department for employee development and talent development? To me, I think that is just outrageous that we would be spending money that way. And then the last one is about the COVID update. I know that I've been getting a lot of texts. People are relieved that the decision to reopen schools January the 4th, that everybody understands that at this point it's way too dangerous for us to reopen. People should be sheltering in place, wearing their masks. I understand CPS has great protocols in place to be safe, but I also understand those safety protocols are when we have less than 5% positivity rate per 100,000. It is when we do not have the spread that we have currently. Those things are great if we are at a lower level, but now that we are high red going to purple, it is way too dangerous for us to open schools as safe as they are. We need to wait. And so I think that it was good that the board is making the decision to wait and make a determination in mid-January after we find out what's happening with the spread of Thanksgiving and the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sellers. We have one.
Yes.
Go ahead.
We have one more speaker who, if with your permission, yes. Brian Taylor is next to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Can people see me?
Yes.
Hear me?
Go ahead. Yes,
okay.
We can.
Well, I want to talk about the very real racial dynamic that exists between police and Black people, which does not dissolve once they enter a school building. All the stereotypes persist. They're more likely to be deemed guilty, more perceived to be violent, stronger, older. This is what happens in our communities. I've had wonderful teachers, but the statistics show that police are much more likely to be called on Black and brown students, as well as those who are differently able. SROs are a new development in American history, and I don't think they're needed. A real community hired trained force composed of people from working class backgrounds could have a much keener eye and softer touch. This is also one of the ways that new jobs could be created, livable wage jobs of value. So this isn't about whether an individual SRO is a cool person or a mean person. It's about an institution whose attitude towards non-white people does not miraculously change on campus. And let me just add that you don't have to be a Black or brown person yourself to be confronted with a situation with police. They escalate. As an institution, they escalate. And we don't have the luxury of hoping that we get one that acts like they have some sense, especially young people. So please take seriously and heed the requests and demands of the Young Activist Coalition, who are expressing the sentiments of a much larger swath of students and adults than they're being credited with. One can argue that many Black people day to day don't run into problems with police until they do. Cincinnati had a policy where people thought that there were no problems with police here. Then Sam DuBose happened. Then a whole other series of these killings and brutalizations happened. What changed? My argument is nothing. The recipe for these things is there. Time for bad things to happen. So I just hope you consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Okay, any other speakers?
No, Ms. Jones, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, moving on. Any kudos?
Carolyn, I have one.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Massey.
Yes. I don't know for sure that we've shared this one publicly, but of course we all know the community has come out throughout the district to support our children and our district during the pandemic. One of those individuals is Matt Woods of Woods Hardware. And I know that there was quite a substantial donation to the district of 30,000 masks, 36,000 3-ply masks, 24 boxes of N95 masks, 480 gallons of hand sanitizer. So I just want to give kudos to Matt Woods of Woods Hardware for thinking about our district during these times and delivering those supplies.
Thank you. Any other kudos? All right. I believe I don't think we have any retirements this evening. So we'll move on. Guess what, Mr. Morosky? It is now your turn for the update on the anti-racism policy.
All right. Thanks, President Jones. This will be quick. As promised, I'm leaving it on board matters until we're ready to have a formal recommendation from Policy Committee for passage, which ideally could be as early as next week. We're meeting this Friday. After the last meeting, there were only a couple more comments. They've been included in a recent draft. And the two were the one from Ms. Bolton regarding the state language, which has been added in the blue line copy that you all hopefully have, but I'll just read it to you as a reminder. Under purpose, the first paragraph ends with, quote, as the State Board of Ed has stated in their set resolution to condemn racism, etc. We also condemn, and then we quote directly from the state resolution in the strongest possible terms, white supremacy culture, hate speech, hate crimes, and violence in the service of hatred. And then secondly and finally, and then if there are any further comments, that's what this obviously is on the agenda for. But finally, President Jones had repeatedly brought up the importance of having language that mirrored the equity policy, and she sent suggestions which round out that section on purpose. The last two sentences lifted directly from equity policy, that the board holds itself and all district and school site decision makers, faculty, etc., accountable for a district-wide culture that respects diversity, equity, inclusion, which is free of racism. To that end, the board is committed to annual self-evaluation, ongoing training, and professional development. So those are kind of the two outstanding things that have now been included. The draft will be poured over Friday in policy, and we'll see what happens after that. Ideally, again, a recommendation of the full board, or it'll go back to committee pending everyone's thoughts. So there it is today. No other changes.
Okay. Thank you. Any conversation, discussion, questions for Mr. Morosky? I believe, Mr. Morosky, if there are none, then you will follow up with the committee to present it for approval. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's on the agenda for Friday, and Ms. Scott will go through and, like, she's been doing, and sort of call out each one and how it's gotten added. And then, yeah, if there are no additional things today, and if the committee is fine with it on Friday, then we would, put it on an agenda. Probably not Monday, but the meeting after that.
Okay. Sounds good. All righty. So the next item on the agenda regarding board development and planning, I just wanted to inform board members that, as you know, January, I don't know what date is it? Our organizational meeting is scheduled for January the 11th. We actually have one business meeting prior to that, but our organizational meeting is January the 11th. So you will, in fact, probably over the next 2 to 3 days, be receiving all the information regarding the organizational chart and the committee structure. So please give that consideration, and it will have timeframes for getting it back to our staff so that we can be prepared for that. We also have scheduled on the 11th a tax budget hearing. That's just a reminder. In additional to that, wanted to make sure that folks reference their board calendar for 2021. One of the things that should be noted is typically we have meetings that are scheduled at 4 o'clock. We have them at off-site, like at our schools. But we understand the situation that we're in, and that may not be possible, but I would urge us to just at a time more appropriate, like next year, that we might consider, if it's safe, that we may be able to do that at some point, and we can always decide that at a later date. So I just wanted to make sure of that. And then finally, with the board work session, very much interested in getting an early jump on planning that agenda. And Mr. Messer, I'd like you and I to work on that if you have time, work on kind of pulling together an agenda and prioritizing that agenda, because it's going to be pretty hefty, I can tell you. So if you're willing to work with me around that, I'd appreciate
I'd love it.
that. Okay.
Love it.
And then also for the work session, I would like to propose and see what board members think about that we actually get a facilitator for this meeting. And I believe there are some options available to us to do that. So just kind of wanted to put it out there and put the feelers out on where people are with that. And we can work from whatever ideas and suggestions you might have. Any thoughts on that?
Carolyn?
Yes, Mr. Messer.
Yeah, and I know you and I talked about this before. OSBA, at least at the last conference that I attended, there was somebody there that said they have staff members that can either do that work, or they have other people that can help support that. But I think having a facilitator so everybody can be engaged in the conversation is always good in groups. So I would fully support that.
Yeah, so in addition to OSBA, we also have internal resource that, we've, through Mayerson, I believe that we have the ability to solicit or access a facilitator through that contract. So that's an option, but we are interested in hearing other options or suggestions, and Ryan and I will be more than happy to follow up on them and identify someone who can meet our needs. So if you have other suggestions about facilitators, if you could please forward that to us, and we'll be happy to pursue it. So are there any other questions then, Mr. Lindy?
Oh, I just wanted to say I think this is a great idea, and I appreciate you raising it, President Jones. I really like what Ryan said about somebody from OSBA. A couple other people do come to mind. I'd be happy to write something up and send it over. But I think probably pros and cons to all of these different options.
Right.
But I do like the idea of a third party.
Okay, sounds good. Ms. Bolton.
Yes, thank you. I think the facilitator is a good idea. I do want us to make sure that we have these really, as you said, hefty issues to deal with, whether it's the new CPS, that kind of visioning, or whether it is the review of the strategic plan. I would hope that we'd be using a facilitator for that kind of discussion, and not have not have 10 items on the agenda, but have really this huge, wonderful focus on what lies ahead. So that's just my 10 bits.
You are absolutely right, and I would say in response to that the board really determines the agenda. So if you all give us 15 items, then it's up to Ryan and I to prioritize that, and we will do that. And I promise you, I mean, we do have some priorities, and so we want to make sure that we allocate enough time for us to have good discussion and planning around those. But it does mean too that we really may not be able to get to every single issue that folks or every single subject that everybody gives us. So we will prioritize that. So thank you for that. Yep. Any other thoughts about the board work session? Wonderful. So we'll move on. Ms. Bolton, you actually have presenting both resolutions. So if you want to present the first resolution.
I'll present the first one, and I'm very supportive of the second one, but I can't find my copy of the second one. So if somebody else will present that, I have no idea what happened to it. I think my puppy stole it. Okay. First resolution, Cincinnati Public Schools, a resolution requesting authority from the Hamilton County Budget Commission to file a modified tax budget for the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year. This is a resolution that needs to be passed. It's required by law, and it needs that kind of passage. And I've asked the treasurer to explain what this means so that our public is aware.
Wonderful.
So happy to.
Need a second? I've so moved, and then I guess a second, and then she can talk about it.
Okay. Is there a second, Mr. Borowski? Great.
Second.
Okay. I got you. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner, did you have anything?
Yes, I can share. There are two different formats that you can choose to file your tax budget. The tax budget is to ensure that we are collecting enough revenues to support our debt payments. That's the main purpose of the tax budget. And so they give you two forms to do. We've been using the modified form for at least 8 or 10 years. I can't even remember what the other one looks like. We haven't used it. And so this is a simplified matter. We do a presentation. We're required by law to advertise in the Inquirer that the tax budget is available for review 10 days prior to board action. It might be 15 days, but and then the tax hearing is prior to the first board meeting, and then we'll ask you to pass it, and then we'll submit it to the Hamilton County.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion? Great. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates? Mrs. Bates?
Oh.
Okay, Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Mr. Messer?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Okay, does anybody have their resolution in front of them, the next resolution? Mr. Morosky, would you please present that next resolution?
I have a resolution completing the evaluation of Superintendent Catherine Laura Mitchell that I will present as written for passage.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Mrs. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Mr. Messer?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Thank you. And so we'll move on to the next item. Superintendent, do you have a report this evening?
I do. I have a very short report. I'm going to ask our Chief Communication Officer to tee up a PowerPoint. Krista Boyle is going to present an update to the questions that were asked last week regarding projections related to students. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. If we could go to the first slide, please. So this is just a reminder of what we shared at the last meeting. Prior to that discussion, we did give an enrollment snapshot in October, and that number that was shared was roughly the same, about 300 under at 4,973.
Separate from enrollment, we also discussed attendance at that meeting, so I just wanted to give a quick update on that and just share that we are currently working with students and families on about 1,000 attendance intervention plans.
That's a good one, buddy.
Next slide, please.
Oh,
And so these are two charts that we've shared before, but I thought it would be helpful just to kind of ground us in some of the withdrawal and enrollment data. So the chart on the left shows that we're at about 3,700 withdrawals to date. In October, when we also shared the chart, the number was at about 2,900. We've had about 3,600 enrollments during roughly that same time period since July 1st. So I just thought this would be helpful context. For the next slide, please, which is the big question, which is where did our withdrawn students go? So the biggest bucket, which I think we probably would not be surprised about, was charter and other public schools in Ohio. That's 57%. Out of Ohio, 14%. Non-public, also 14%. Homeschool, since there's been some discussion about this, I just thought that would be interesting to share as well. That's 2%. And then 13% is the other category, which can include folks who have moved out of the U.S. or moved and did not share a school, or we didn't have a school reach out for records. And then the last slide is just withdrawal percent by multiple demographics, and this roughly tracks with our district demographics, but thought it would also be helpful to share. And so that is the last slide. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions that board members may have about the presentation of the information?
Yes, Mr. Lindy.
First, I just want to say thank you both to the superintendent and to Krista. I just wanted to hear what you thought about the numbers. Do those look good, not good? Well, what's your opinion about what that means for us?
Sure.
So we are never happy to lose students. And so I know that our communications department is working on a recruitment plan, and it's actually at least a two-prong approach. And one is really, actually three. One is really centered around preschool students. We have a lot of good data that if we can get kids into the district in preschool and keep them in second or kindergarten, then they're more likely to, stay with CPS or enter into CPS. So the second prong is the transition from preschool to a CPS kindergarten. And so we're working on that from our perspective in terms of our preschool classrooms, but also we work with Preschool Promise. And so they promote within their preschool sites kindergarten transition into CPS. So that's the second prong. And the third prong is to really recruit those students who left CPS. We believe that students left CPS due to the fact that maybe they sought other in-person options 5 days a week. We have been seeing a decline in charter school enrollment in the Cincinnati area over the last several years. And so we believe that we can get the students back and have them within our school district. Chris, I'm not sure if you had any additional thoughts.
No, that was great. You covered it. Thanks for hitting the recruiting piece, because I think that's really critically important as we think about the next couple months.
President Jones, can I just follow up on one piece?
Yes,
before we
go ahead. I got you, Ms. Powers.
I'll be quick. I wanted to make sure I had the big picture story right, because I think last meeting it seemed like the delta between where we are and what we expected was really coming from families who didn't enroll preschool and kindergarten, and that was a really good piece of news. I think that's still true. I just wanted to check that, and then I think what we heard about the enrollment and the transfers, it seems like those are basically canceling each other out. Like we did have about 700 or 37, I'm going to get the number wrong, but like a number of families leave CPS and a number of families transfer in. And those are basically offsetting. And the reason, is this the right story?
So let me take them in two pieces. So the first piece is correct. So we mostly lost kids in the younger grades and actually saw an increase at the high school level. In terms of, if we could pull the slide back up with the two tables, I think it's slide 2. So the withdrawals do not include, thank you. The withdrawals do not include students who, next one, sorry. The withdrawals do not include students who transferred to other CPS schools. On the enrollment side, that number of 3,600 does include kids who transferred to virtual, which is about 1,600. So if you pull that number, Mr. Lindy, you would get close to that 1,000 number, which was the delta. So I'm glad you brought that up. Does that help?
I think I'm good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Bowers.
Yes, and in honor of transparency, and I don't know if you all do this, but like with most employers, they do exit interviews when someone's transitioning from one place to another. Have we ever thought about it? We may already capture this information of finding out when, I guess, when we get requests for a child's records. Do we ever follow with that family as to why they're transferring or why they're leaving the district?
That is a great question. And so we have just started. So we have started some outreach to families who are leaving to learn more about that. Historically, I'm not sure if it's something that we've done and is normal practice. I know a lot of times it's the schools that we actually hear from. So families themselves don't call us, the schools do. But there's definitely, I think, an opportunity to follow up with those families directly as part of a regular process.
Right. Okay.
So I do know, Board Member Bowers, that we have done that type of surveying in the past. I can remember even having the data to understand why parents left CPS very specifically. So I can't say that we've done it, that we did it last year, but I know that we have done that type of surveying in the past. And that's how we found out that a good portion of our families at this time left due to the feeling that they felt when they walked into a school building. So sometimes the decision had nothing to do with academic achievement. It was how they were welcomed or not welcomed within a school.
Right, because thank you. As with and it's really some learned information for us. Like you said, I remember that initiative about friendly schools, or it was an initiative. I remember it, but that would just give us information about some things that maybe we need to look at, even if it's not academics. That's just as important. So I was just wondering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Do I have a motion to approve the revised recommendations of the superintendent?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
What, discussion first?
Oh, I thought we did that. Or maybe I got it wrong. Did we do discussion? Sorry. Ms. Bolton?
Yes, could we review what was revised?
Okay, Superintendent, did you not get the revised? Everyone should have gotten it.
I printed all my stuff out a little too early, I think.
Okay, go ahead, Superintendent.
Yes, I would be happy to. So under both sections, both for certificated personnel as well as civil service, there was a line authorizing the treasurer to compensate payout for any rollover annual leave from last year that employees were not able to take. And so just for everyone's benefit, at the time that COVID happened, everyone started working so hard on crisis management all throughout the summer and opening school that many people were not able to take vacation time. And so this allows those people to extend those vacation days until June or be paid out those dollars in exchange for the time, as opposed to losing those vacation hours because they couldn't use them because of COVID.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
That's great.
Thank you.
Great. Any other discussion? Sorry about that. Okay, Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates? Can't hear you. Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Mr. Messer?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the revised report of the treasurer?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? And Treasurer Wagner, given that, yeah, there may some folks may not have seen the latest revision. Can you update on that?
Oh, certainly.
Or I'm sorry, I wanted the updates, but I didn't know if that was what you were going to do. You may have another comment or something.
Actually, I just have two comments to make. First being, you may or may not be aware that Hamilton County was given a very large CARES Act grant, and they decided that they wouldn't be able to spend it out by the end of December as a requirement. So they've offered little mini grants to each of the Hamilton County school districts based at $50 per student. So our portion of that would be $1.7 million, $798 something. The deadline is December 3rd, and so we are at the final stages of putting our grant together. I've signed it. We're going to ship it off. But I just want to let you know that that was about. The restrictions. It's not as open as you might think it is, and it can only be reimbursing us for things that we've spent on COVID that has not been part of another CARES grant. And so it made it a little bit harder to identify those things that we've already spent the money on and not something that it's a year-long contract, right? So we're working on it. The second item that I wanted to share is that I've got the first draft of a next year's budget development process put together that focuses on the equitable distribution of financial resources as called out in the strategic plan. And so I've been sharing it with a couple people and going to be sharing it with leadership team next week, Finance Committee December 17th, and then hopefully at the board workshop as we're talking about the scope of next year's initiatives, we can roll that all in and adopt it at their next board meeting after that. Very exciting. So can I answer any questions about the Treasurer's report and specifically?
Ms. Bolton?
Again, I don't have the revisions.
Okay, so there were a few. We had to make some revisions to pick up some things from the legal counsel. So we decided just to grab any new thing that came in to make it easier to pay the bills. There's an authorization to enter into a lease agreement with Gable Montessori to develop the greenhouse, but it's a grant that's paid for by the Agriculture Department. The second one from legal counsel is a modification of the CFT contract, adding a stipend for teachers who are they're increasing their caseload because of the online enrollment. So it helps teachers with that. On page 5, non-public auxiliary services, there's a award of purchase order. It's just pass-through money. They're buying some Chromebooks for their kids. Page 6, we added a couple then and nows so that we can get these bills paid out their last year's POs. One was EL Education for College Hill Fundamental Academy for professional development at a national conference that's online. One is for Lopez Studio Group it's an invoice to help with rearranging some stuff in the basement for IT. We had a late request for athletics and extracurriculars for first student, the activity buses, how we did the 90-day appropriation. This is the rest of the year. And then an agreement for Mayerson Academy to help with the Thriving Classroom project. So those are the changes. More than usual.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to use the board's time on that. I
okay.
missed the revisions.
That's okay.
I do have a question for the treasurer regarding the Roman numeral 1A regarding the Teach for America contract. I think would be good to have that explained.
Actually, if the superintendent or Mr. McDole would like to address that.
Great,
Sure.
thank you.
Yes, I'm on, and Ms. Bolton, I'm glad to address that. During the summer, as we were working through all of our work on trying to reduce contracts, that we put in to reduce the TFA contract by that amount listed there. Inadvertently, that left off some of our second-year individuals, so I do apologize for that. So what we're asking is to go back to what we originally had asked for, no more, no less, but we want to make sure we're honoring those second-year employees and stipends.
Thank you. So it's not doubling it as much as it is restoring it.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments, discussion? Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Mr. Messer? Mr. Messer, are you with us?
Mute.
Yep, there we go. I kept hitting it, sorry. Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Thank you. Any inquiries or updates? Yes, Mr. Lindy.
Thanks, President Jones. Other folks may have heard the same story on NPR this week, but there was a nice piece on the MAP results nationwide and looking at where students were and whether there's evidence nationally of learning loss. I was really interested to hear the piece because it spoke to some of what I think we saw in the report that we got from the administration, that there actually looks like there's been less erosion of learning or less missed learning than we thought there might be. The one thing that the news story flagged was that it did look in some cases that participation was low or lower than we would have expected. I think there it was about 25% lower. And they were somewhat concerned that could be particularly concentrated in low-income students. That part of the reason why we're not seeing the missed learning is because we're not getting test results from the kids where that loss of learning would be most likely to have occurred. And I wanted to learn more about whether that's something we were seeing in our data or not. I'm going to, President Jones, I don't know if this is an assignment or if this is an inquiry. But I tried to go back through the report that we got, and I did see some breakdown by different racial groups, by IEP status, by LEP status. But I just wanted to hear what the opinion of the administration was for whether they were concerned about missing particularly low-income students in the test results, or whether we're not worried about that.
Okay, I see Assistant Superintendent Ahmad hopped on.
Yes.
You have a response from Mr. Lindy?
I do. As far as the participation, we did really well in our elementary schools. We had lower participation at our high schools. As far as comparing our subgroup data from post-COVID to pre-COVID, it's about the same. But you are correct in making the determination in regards to there is less loss in academic achievement that most of us thought we would see in a remote learning environment. So that's the good news. The better news is that our team, our curriculum team, along with principals and also a newly formed committee, it's looking at what can we do to close those gaps that we are very much aware of, and using that MAP data to specifically look at content areas based on accelerated learning.
and the state helps with this as well. But based on accelerated learning, we are looking at power standards. We know we cannot get a full year of instruction in the way we were in the past. So it's something that's called power standards, that we're looking at the essential standards and really honing in on those standards to help close those gaps. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm available to discuss further if you like.
I think I just had one follow-up, Tiana, and I do really appreciate that. And I think the power standards idea sounds just great. The report that I was looking at from you all said that about 81% of kids took the MAP this year. And I thought I heard you say a second ago that that's in line with past years. I would have thought we'd be close to 100%.
No, the high school administration MAP, this is only their second year taking the MAP. The MAP was administered for a couple of years now for our elementary schools, but it's new for our high schools. So with that, we had to support our teachers in administering MAP, and also it was very different for them for this year because they took that test remotely. It wasn't face-to-face.
Got it.
And so I want to make the connections because I want to make sure that you understand, because it was remote at home, I think that's why we saw less participation in the high schools.
Yeah. And I think the thing I was trying to listen for, and it sounds like this is not something that you all are concerned about, is that the fact that it's low, even if it's just in high schools, that explain why we're not seeing learning loss. That if the kids where the learning losses happen just didn't take the test.
I would also say we're looking at that MAP data closely, and we're also looking at grades. So looking at the grades, so we want to use multiple data points and not just the MAP. So some area that we're looking at, so looking at our grades, we've increased some of the Fs. This year, it was about 5%. So looking at that, targeting which kids need more support along with the MAP data, we're really trying to customize our support for students.
Cool. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for fielding my question.
Thank you. Any other inquiries and updates? Okay, assignments. Ms. Bolton, unmute.
Yes, and perhaps you want to give this assignment, but just to remind you about the letter to the governor regarding essential employees. And I very frankly, I'd be more than willing for us to have a resolution even as early as next week, too. I think this is critical.
Yes, I was going to assign it, but it's okay. But the assignment could perhaps be to Mr. Hoying to draft a resolution for us to be ready for approval at Monday's board meeting.
Great.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Any other assignments? Last call. All righty. So thank you all. And hearing no other business, I declare the meeting adjourned. Have a good evening.